Hi, it's Rob from the Bush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing the first part of the Lord of Blights tutorial. So the first colour that we're going to use is Citadel Kislev Flesh, and this is going to be to do all of the skin on the Lord of Blights and also on one of the severed heads which is hanging from the gallows above him. Now really it is up to you what colour flesh you want to give him. There's so many different colours that you can give him. The main thing that I'm going for is a slightly sickly looking colour on top of this, so as you see the layers progress you'll see it getting slowly more and more ill looking rather than the sort of like the more healthy normal flesh colour that you might see. Next up we're going to paint all of those wounds and we're going to use Citadel Mephiston Red, so you want to give the inside of every wound that you can find on him this lovely red colour. Although there's lots of maggots crawling out of his stomach there, if you still go around them, even if you paint all the maggots, we can go over them with the next base colour. It's just that we want to make sure that all of those wounds are red inside, right away from one edge to the other. You also notice on some of the wounds there's a flap of skin, so you want to paint the inside part of the flap of skin red too. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Elysian green and we're going to use this to paint his armour. Now this is the standard Nurgle armour. You can, if you wanted to, do them in metallics, sort of like Leadbelcher, and weather them, corrode them. Or you can do them in the more traditional Nurgle colour like here. Usually I just do them as normal armour colours, but as he's a bit more of a character for the maggot kin, I thought I'd give him a bit more of the traditional Nurgle colours with it. Like so. Once you've finished the plate armour, you move on to the next layers. So now I'm going to use Citadel Dryad bark. We're going to use this to do one of the heads, which is hanging from the gallows there. We're also going to use this to do the handle on his hammer. Now it looks like I didn't paint one of the heads with Cadian Fleshtone straight away there. So if you used it to paint one of the heads, that's not a problem. We will be reapplying Cadian Fleshtone to one of the heads at some point later on in the video, it would seem. To give that a nice smooth coat of Dryad bark, and then we can move on to the next layer. So next up we're going to be using Citadel Wordbearer's Red. Now it is a good colour, although it's a layer, it does make quite a good base colour too, I find. If you do find any little streaks or anything like that, you can just go a quick coat again, but you shouldn't have too much problem with it. We are going to do the front and the back cloth on the miniature. Also when you're looking from the back, make sure that you go between his legs there and colour in the back of this section of cloth as well, because you can see it quite clearly from the back if you're looking straight across the base. Got a nice focused in shot of my thumb there. Try and focus on the model next time here. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Leadbelcher. I'm going to use this for all the silvery metallic parts, using this over Model Air Chrome, which you quite often use, because the Leadbelcher is a bit more of a worn and dark, kind of a dingy metal colour I think. So we're painting the blade of his sword here, which is quite a bit out the way there. I'm also going to paint the panel on the back of his shield, and the head of the hammer too. And then there's also a few little details like the bits between the plates of wood on the shield. So you'll see that when we come to the next part. We're going to carry on painting the Leadbelcher on here and move on to the next section. So next up we're going to do another metallic. This time we're going to use Vallejo Model Air Rust. I prefer this to the Agrax Bronze, as it does give a bit more coverage when you're painting over white. I think it does give a bit better coverage as well, just in general. But I do like the Model Air Rust colour. It's very, very easy to put on because it's very thin, but it has a decent pigment, so although it may not give as good a coverage as the Model Air Chrome, because it is so thin, it's very easy to just put a second layer on there really, really quick and cover any streaks that you may get. So you can see here we painted the skull at the back there with a bit of Cadian Fleshtone, just on the skin part, leaving the bone sticking out white. And we're now going to use some Citadel Kislev Flesh to paint the third head hanging down there. Once we've painted these on, we're going to be shading them and making them look a little bit more pale and disgusting. For the time being, we're just putting a base coat on, so 3 different skin tones on there. Like so. Next up, we're going to use Citadel Rakarth flesh. For this, we're going to be using it on the horns that are coming out the side of his head. We're also going to be using it on all of the bones, so you've got the skull and the bits of teeth and stuff like that sticking out of the severed heads hanging from the gallows. We've also got bits of his spine just behind the gallows post. And as well as that, we're also going to paint up all the maggots with Rakarth flesh too. There really is some great details on this. I particularly like how the gallows is held in place with bits of his skin that have been pulled from his back. The gallows has been slid through and then it's been nailed in place, which is pretty grotty. Now I'm going to use Vallejo Beige brown, which is one of the Flames of War colours, but it's a really nice shade of brown. I really like doing wood in this colour as well. So we're going to paint all the panels of wood with this, and also the gallows. You'll see here, I'll link up how to paint wood, like I do here. I've done a video on this in the past using a set of stocks. And the stocks are pretty flat, there's no details on them, and it's painting up the wood so that you get the details like the grain and all that kind of thing on it. But it's a really easy way to do it using shades, so I'll link that video here. Now we're going to use some Citadel Mournfang brown and use this to do the leather straps, which like going across his chest and holding on pieces of his armour. Should also say we use the beige brown from the previous layer to paint the pouch on his back as well. Not sure what he's keeping in his pouch or what he's going to spend his coin on, if there is coins on there. But we do use beige brown to paint that, so wax them on that coin pouch that you can see unpainted there. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Zandri dust. I'm going to use this to do the straps on the handle of the sword here. We're also going to use it to do the ropes on the gallows too. Slightly off camera there, sorry. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Pink Horror to paint that funky tail that's growing out his back. And this could possibly be the last base colour that we're going to do. Give that a nice smooth coat. You may have to do 2 because the pink colours do seem to streak a little bit. There we have the base colours all attached. Now we're going to start with the shades. So we're starting with Citadel Nuln Oil. I'm going to use this on all of the Leadbelcher parts. Now it doesn't matter if you put too much on this or like it leaves a little bit of streaking or a bit of pooling, because it does, when it dries, it will look quite grimy. Try and keep the pooling to a minimum, but if it does get some darker areas, that's not too bad. You can dirt them up with a bit of a Draxair shade later on, or go over it with a bit of Rise of Rust and that, just to make it look as though it is corroded. Also going to be using Nuln Oil on the hooks there that are holding the heads up, like the meat hooks. So basically any of the Leadbelcher. With that done, we're going to go on to Citadel Athonian Camo Shade. I'm going to use this on all of the armour plates. And also I think one of the heads as well. Now we're actually using Citadel Agrax Earthshade here. For whatever reason, I missed the little section at the front where I show the paint. But we're basically going to use a draxair shade over all of the wooden panels and all of the modeler rust. You can also add some to the hammer if you want to, but we are going to come back and weather that in a little bit. Should say we also used Nuln Oil on the Dryad bark head at the back. It's hanging from the gallows. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Reicland Fleshtone. I'm going to use this on his skin. Now, it does give it a more natural shade to it. I'm trying to not let it pool as much, just to give it a little bit of darkness there, because when we come to highlight it, we don't want it being too dark in the recesses. We don't want it to be pooled anywhere. So try and give it quite a light coat of Reicland Fleshtone here. That shouldn't prevent us getting the skin how we want to get it looking in a bit. So now we're returning to Citadel Athonian Camo shade. We're just going to paint this head at the back. So if you've already painted it, don't worry about that. I'm just catching myself up here. That just gives it a slightly off colour when you come to recolour the skin. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Drakenhof Nightshade. We're going to do a really light coat of this on the other skull. Or the other severed head, I should say. Just keeping that on the skin to give it a slightly sickly blue colour. You can add some of that to the Dryad bark skin as well. I use a little bit of Citadel Druchii Violet. I'm going to use this on all of the red. So inside his mouth, inside all of the wounds, you want to try and avoid the maggots that are crawling out of him. You also want to do it on the loincloth as well. Give that a nice shade. I'll throw a link up here for the gore and that kind of thing, videos that I've done in the past. May be quite handy for you. Now we're moving on to Citadel Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to paint all of the maggots, the horns on his head, and also any of the bones that are showing. So you've got his spine poking out the back, just behind his head. You've also got the skull showing on that head at the back there too. You've got little bits of bone showing on the Dryad bark skull in the middle there as well. I didn't realise at this point, but there is actually pieces of the skin at the front of the face missing, so you can paint that on too. So we're now returning to Citadel Kislev Flesh. Say returning to, we're actually just painting it with Kislev Flesh. I'm going to be giving this an almost patchy kind of look to the skin, so it's not going to be 100% smooth all over. You do want to give it kind of slightly discoloured, as though some parts are darker or lighter than others. So if you get a few little streaks in there, it doesn't matter too much. You want to try and get smooth edges to them, so it's not just a dark and a straight line and a light bit next to it. Now to work on the skin, we're going to add a little bit of Citadel Nurgling Green. This is just going to start giving him a slightly sickly colour. And by the end of it, hopefully we should have a look of someone who's really not well. With that layer finished, we're now going to move on to another one, mixing Citadel Nurgling Green with the previous mix, so it's slightly lighter, slightly greener. Just going to give that a going over there. So you can see he is starting to look pretty sickly. When you hold him from a distance from the light, it just looks a bit more like normal skin colour, but when you bring that closer, you can see the green tint to it. Makes him look a little bit disgusting. And for one final highlight, we're going to mix a little Vallejo White with the previous mix. I'm just going to highlight all the sections of skin that would be catching the light. Because although we've done the green to it to give it that sickly colour, we haven't really highlighted it as such, we've just changed the tone of the flesh. So we're going to use this one just to highlight and put this on the top sides of the skin. And any little ridges or little areas that catch the light on the skin. And keep going, and then when we come back we'll start on the new layer. So the skin finished, we're now going to use a little bit of Vallejo red wash. I'm going to start going around the edges of all of the open wounds. Now you're going to be going around the edges a little bit further than usual here, because we're going to use a bit of Carroburg Crimson too, to really get them looking a bit raw and infected. So this is to sort of like spread out around the skin as though the whole area is a bit inflamed. And then we're going to be adding a bit of Carroburg Crimson to those bits just around the edges to make them look even darker in a while. Now we're going to use some Citadel Dorn Yellow. Now I should have really done this layer prior to the previous one. We're going to use this to do all of the boils and the spots that are growing on them. Now it's a light enough yellow that it looks like a large spot or a boil or something like that. We're going to add some of the Vallejo red wash around these two to make them look painful and sore, a bit inflamed. So as I say, this should have really come before the previous layer, but it doesn't matter too much because you're working on a slightly separate thing here anyway. So you just paint each of those spots and boils with that, then we can come back and add a little bit of the wash to them. So it's back to the Vallejo red wash, and all you're going to be doing is going around each of the spots to give them that painful, inflamed look. There's also a couple of spots on the severed heads as well. I'm not too sure if I've done them here, but if I haven't, please do them at the same time here too. There's that many details on this model that sometimes it is quite tricky to keep track of them all, so you might find it hops back and forth a little bit on some things. That's only because it's got that much going on. It is easy to miss some details. Next up, it's Citadel Carroburg Crimson. We're going to go around the very edges of each of the wounds, just to give them a really inflamed and painful look to it. So you've got the lighter red where the skin's going to be a bit tender, and then you've got the really inflamed bit where it's going to be really sore and the wound's opened. Just to make that a little bit more hideous. Now we're going to go onto the Rakarth flesh and start working on the bone colours again, and the maggots. So on the maggots you want to be trying to do the paint, leaving the Seraphim Sepia in the recesses. You want to try and catch each of those tiny little stripes they have on there, the raised ridges, with the Rakarth flesh. At the moment I'm using a pretty new Citadel medium layer brush, because it has a really good point on there. If you want to use a smaller brush with a better point, please go ahead. So long as you're getting the ridges on the maggots, it doesn't matter too much what you use. So now we're going to add a little bit of white to the Rakarth flesh. We're just going to highlight all these maggots. Just notice quite a hideous mould line running down that horn. You're just trying to highlight the top edges of all these maggots. Now I'm going to use Citadel Beige Brown. I'm going to reapply the wood colour to all of the wooden panels and the gallows. When you're doing this, you really do want to get it a nice smooth colour, because we're going to put the streaks and the grains on using some shades. I will link in the video to how to paint wood, which is one that was up a while ago. But it's a very handy method of painting any flat surface that's meant to be wood, of how to get that grain on and get it looking really, really good. So with the beige brown back on, we're now going to use a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. What you're going to be doing here is I'm using an Army Painter Wargamer character brush, and I'm just applying it in ridges. You want to get quite a bit of Agrax Earthshade down the bottom there, and also at the very, very top as well, where the wood joins the modeler rust sections, and you're just trying to get streaks and lines run down as though you're painting on the grain with the Agrax Earthshade. You can see already that the grain's starting to show. The beige brown's light enough that it will show up the Agrax Earthshade. We're going to do the same on the gallows too. So you can see that, the way the grain looks. Try and keep it darker at the end of each of those pieces of the gallows, so where the wood is connecting to the other wood, make that dark with a bit more Agrax Earthshade on it, and the same where the wood joins the top of the shield. And the reason for that is it's going to get water, dirt and grime all going into the ends of the wood. Because of the very nature of Nurgle, those parts are going to be the bits that are rotting first, so they are going to be darker and a bit grimier. So if you imagine an old wooden door that's been soaking up the damp over years, the top and the bottom are going to be darker, a bit more rotted than the rest of the door. So that's what we're kind of trying to go for with these wooden sections. Now I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Athonian Camo Shade. We're going to start adding this to the edges of each of the pieces of wood, just to give them that damp look, as though there is water got into it. It's rotting quite a bit on the ends there. You're also going to add this to the top and bottom of the wooden parts on the shield too, so don't forget about them. So now we're going to add a little bit of white to the Vallejo beige brown that we used to do the wood. We're just going to highlight the top edges of some of these little bits here, and some of the sloping edges. So if they're sloping, you want to highlight the edge which will be catching the light more. Like so. And we're going to do the same on the gallows at the top as well. Because this hasn't got as many ridges on it, you're just going to highlight what you can and add a few little highlights of your own to it. So now we're going back to the loincloth. We're going to use Citadel Leadbelcher Red. I'm just going to reapply the colour, leaving some of the Druchii violet in the recesses. Work on the front and the back cloth there as well, get them looking good. So the base colour is reapplied. We're now going to use a little bit of Citadel Mephiston Red to really bring out the red on these. You're going to leave it so that you can see the shade in the recesses. You're going to leave some of the Leadbelcher red so that's visible around the shade in the recesses. You're going to apply the Mephiston Red into these areas. So you're going to be covering about maybe 60% of the Leadbelcher red that you've just reapplied. With that layer done, we're now going to use Citadel Wasdaka Red. I'm going to start to highlight the loincloth. You're going to be thinking about where the light's going to catch it. So the tops of the ridges, the underside of any holes in the material, anything like that, you want to be just bringing out a little highlight onto them to make them a little bit more visible. Once again, return to the back of the loincloth. You're just going to highlight that as you have done the front. Like so. So that's where we're stopping for this week. Now this is the finished Lord of Blights, that's what we're aiming for. So next week when we have part 2, it'll be how to finish off the rest of it so that you can get it looking like this. I've done it in 2 parts just because it is such a big model, such a detailed one. It would have been nearly an hour long to do, and it would have been quite a slog to get through that if you're doing it as a tutorial. So sticking it down as 2 parts, and then it's in nice easy to watch sections. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much.